Hello everybody, today we're going to build a basic calorie calculator using Python. This video is for absolute beginners who want to learn the very basics of Python. Topics covered in today's video include variables, data types, basic operations, input and outputs, type conversion, and if statements. Okay, the first thing we need to do in order to build this calculator is get the user's weight, height, age, and gender. Now we need all this info to calculate the amount of calories they should intake. Now the way we are going to get this information is using the inputs and outputs. First, we are going to ask the user their weight. We can do this by typing the following. Weight equals float input. Enter your weight in kg :space. Now the words in quotation marks over here are strings. Strings is a common data type in Python. We want to use words in our code, we can use strings. Note that strings must always be inside quotation marks. Furthermore, weight here is a variable. When we want to assign something a value, we can use variables. Now the reason why I put float over here is because it's going to convert the user's input into a float number. A float is another common data type in Python. It is basically numbers but with decimal points. So if the user entered 5, the code would automatically transcript it into 5.0. Now when I enter this code in the output section of our Python compiler, we are going to get the following. Enter your weight in kg. And the reason why it just puts this following is because that is our text over here. And in the output feature of our screen, we can type any number we want. For example, 150. Code execution successful. To recap, weight is our variable name. We assign the equal sign when we want to assign the variable name a value. We type float in order to make the user's input a float number. We use the input feature so the user can input the number they want. Also, the syntax is float parentheses, input parentheses, string, because it ensures that the input function executes first, and then the conversion from input to float executes next. Now we are going to ask the user for their height by typing the following code. Height equals float input. Enter your height in centimeters. Notice how the code is pretty much exactly the same. The only thing we changed here is the string. Instead of displaying enter weight in kg, we want to display enter height in kg. Note that centimeters can still contain decimal points, and so we're still going to use the float feature. Next, we want the age. We can do this by typing age equals int input. Enter your age. Now, the only difference here again is the strings. This time we have different words because we want the S to user their age. And we also have int here. Int is another data type in Python, and it stands for integer. It is different from floats because they're whole numbers. While float numbers contain decimal points such as 5.0, integers are only whole numbers and will be such as 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Now the reason we want an integer here and not a float is because an age is a whole number. You can't say 13.5 for age, you would say 14 or 13. Finally, we want the user's gender. We can say gender equals input. Enter your gender :space. Notice how this time we didn't use int or float. And the reason for that is because when they enter their gender, it is going to be a string. It is not going to be a number. We only use float and integers when we're handling numbers. Now let's run all this code. Enter weight in kg, let's say 150. Enter your height in centimeters, let's say 500. Enter your age, let's say 25. And enter gender, let's say male. Notice how we get code execution successful. So now that we have handled all the inputs allowing the user to enter in the data, we can now use if and else statements and calculations in order to give the amount of calories they need to intake. First, we are going to write if gender $= is equal to string male : BMR is equal to 88.36 plus 13.4 times weight plus 4.8 times height plus or minus 5.7 times age. Now let's start off with what we know. We know BMR here is a variable, and we know it's assigned to some mathematical calculations. Basically, this is the actual calculation used when trying to calculate the number of calories an individual needs. We just use code to do it for us. Here it is evident why we need the user's weight, height, age, and gender, because we're going to use all that information in this section of the code. Now, there are some key points. Here, star stands for multiplication, and the plus and minus symbols over here obviously stand for addition and subtraction. Now, the code starts off with the word if, which is called an if statement. Basically, if the user enters male during this section of the output feature, it is going to run this code. Now, we use the double equal sign to assign the if statement to male. Now, the reason why it is separated because male and female is because the way the calories are calculated for each gender are different. And so we need to specify if the user is male or female. Now let's write the code for what happens if the user enters female instead of male. Else, BMR equals 447.6 plus 9.2 times weight plus 3.1 times height, and then finally minus 4.3 times age. Now, again, we used the variable BMR and we assigned it to some mathematical calculation. However, notice that instead of an if statement, we used an else statement. Basically, if the user enters male, then it will run this section of the code right here. However, if they enter female, then it will skip all this code and instead run this code. This is when an else block is used. Notice we don't need to set an equal sign for the else statement because we only had two options here, male or female. If the person were enter male, then gender is equal to male and it will run this code. However, if they don't, there's only one other option and it must be equal to female, which is this mathematical calculation. Now the only thing left to do here is to print the statement and display it in the output section of the screen. And we can do that by typing the following code. Print, parentheses, your estimated daily calories needs, space, int BMR, calories. Now, whenever we need to print something, we use the print function in Python. And it's pretty simple. It will print whatever you say onto the output section of the screen. Now notice how we say we use a string, your estimated daily calories needs, and then we do int BMR. Basically, we're using this value and we're putting it in this print function. So we're going to be able to print the final amount of calories onto the output section of the code. Notice how we need commas in order to separate these values. Without commas, this code would result in an error. And so we need commas to separate the strings and the int. So when we run this code, enter weight in kg, let's say 50. Enter height in centimeters, let's say 100. Enter age, let's say 25. Enter gender, let's say male. And we're going to get our final output calories, which is, in this case, 1,095 calories per day. Thanks for watching to today's video. If you really enjoyed it and if you learned something new, please hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you.